The conference room smelled like lemon polish and expensive cologne. My daughter sat 3 chairs down from me, eyes fixed on her phone, fingers moving across the screen with that particular rhythm of someone pretending to be too busy for eye contact. Across the mahogany table, her lawyer arranged papers with the careful precision of a man who'd rehearsed this moment. He was maybe 30, with a navy suit that fit too well and a tie bar that caught the overhead lights each time he moved. When he finally looked up at me, his smile had the practiced warmth of someone who'd learned to package condescension as courtesy. "Mr. Patterson," he said, sliding a document across the table, "I think you'll find our proposal quite fair." I let the paper sit there between us. Through the window behind him, I could see the parking garage across the street, concrete levels stacked like a child's blocks. A sedan backed out slowly from the 3rd floor, brake lights flashing twice. "Fair to whom?" I asked. My daughter's typing stopped. The thing about betrayal is that it rarely announces itself with trumpets and drama. It starts smaller, with a phone call that comes 3 weeks late, with holiday plans that somehow never include you, with that particular silence that replaces what used to be easy conversation. But you notice. You always notice. You just choose, for a while, to tell yourself stories about misunderstandings and busy schedules and how grown children need their space. Until the day you can't anymore. I'd been practicing corporate law for 26 years. The kind of law that happens in rooms like this one, where millions change hands through signatures and handshakes, where every comma carries weight and every clause conceals a battlefield. I'd learned to read people the way I read contracts, line by line, watching for the gaps between what they said and what they meant. It's a skill that serves you well in conference rooms and poorly at kitchen tables. My ex-wife had mentioned that more than once during our last year together. The morning light through my kitchen window catches dust that shouldn't be there. I wipe the counter before making coffee. Same ritual for 15 years in this house, same blue mug from the cabinet, same view of the maple tree that drops leaves onto my car 9 months out of 12. The tree needs trimming. I've been meaning to call someone about it since April. It's October now. My daughter Caroline had called the previous Thursday, not on Sunday afternoon like she used to back when we had Sunday afternoon calls, but on Thursday at 6:40 in the evening, which meant she'd remembered while driving home from somewhere and wanted to check the task off her list before the weekend. "Dad, we need to talk about the Riverside property." Not hello, not how are you. Just straight to business, which should have told me everything. "I'm listening," I'd said. "I think it's time we formalize the arrangement. I've been managing it for 3 years now, and with the market the way it is, we should probably restructure the ownership to reflect current realities." Current realities. That phrase alone should have been a siren. In my line of work, when someone starts talking about current realities, they're usually preparing to take something that isn't entirely theirs. The Riverside property was a 4-unit apartment building I'd bought in 1998, back when that neighborhood was still rough and the property cost less than a decent car. I'd put Caroline's name on the title when she graduated law school, a quarter share to give her a start, something solid while she found her footing. She'd helped with tenant issues the past few years, collected rents, coordinated repairs. Good experience, I'd thought, a way for her to learn how assets work in the real world. "What kind of restructuring?" I'd asked. "Just some paperwork. I'm having my lawyer draw something up. You'll want to review it, obviously. Can you meet us Tuesday, 10 a.m.? Us? Not me. Us? That's when I knew. I told her Tuesday worked fine, kept my voice level and unremarkable. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for 20 minutes, coffee going cold in my hand, watching the maple's shadow stretch across the driveway. Then I went to my study and pulled the original property file from the cabinet where I keep documents that matter. The folder was thick, organized with labeled dividers, every form and addendum in chronological order. I'd built my career on never trusting memory when paper exists. The original deed was there. The title transfer documents were there, and beneath them, held with a paperclip that had started to rust at the corners, was the co-ownership agreement I'd drafted 7 years ago, the one Caroline had signed the same day I added her name to the property. I'd written it on a Saturday afternoon in this same study, taking my time with the language, building in protections the way you build a foundation, invisible until you need it to hold weight. I read through it twice that evening, following each clause with my finger like a man checking a map before a long drive. Then, I made a photocopy and put the original back in its folder. The copy went into my briefcase, and the briefcase went by the front door, ready for Tuesday. On Monday, I drove past the Riverside building. It was a 10-minute detour from my office, but I wanted to see it with fresh eyes, the way Caroline's lawyer would see it if he'd done his homework. The neighborhood had changed since '98. Coffee shop on the corner now, boutique selling candles and throw pillows, fresh paint on the row houses across the street. The property itself looked good. New gutters, Carolyn had mentioned those. Landscaping neat. The rents had doubled since I bought the place, maybe more. At current market rate, the building was worth $700,000, possibly $8. My quarter share of nothing had become a substantial something. I parked across the street and watched for a few minutes. A young woman came out of the second-floor unit, yoga mat under her arm, reusable coffee cup in hand. Good tenant. The kind who pays on time and doesn't call at midnight about stopped drains. The building was doing well, which meant Caroline was doing well from it, which raised the question of why she needed to restructure anything at all, unless she wanted all of it. Tuesday morning came clear and cold. I dressed the way I always dress for meetings where I plan to say very little. Gray suit, white shirt, no tie. Nothing that draws attention, nothing that signals either aggression or weakness. I arrived at her lawyer's office at 9:55, early enough to show I took this seriously, late enough to avoid small talk in the lobby. The building was downtown, all glass and steel, the kind of place that charges you for parking and makes you sign in with a security guard who doesn't look up from his computer. I rode the elevator to the 14th floor and gave my name to the receptionist, who'd been hired, I suspected, primarily for her ability to make visitors feel both welcomed and insignificant. She smiled professionally and gestured toward leather chairs that probably cost what I pay in property taxes. I didn't sit. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. From this height, the cars looked like toys. A delivery truck double-parked, flashers blinking. Pedestrians flowed around it like water around a stone. I used to work in a building like this one, back before I started my own practice, back when I had to check with 3 people before making a decision and spent half my time in meetings that could have been emails. I'd hated it. Not the work itself, but the inefficiency, the way hierarchy slowed everything down. When I finally opened my own firm, the first thing I did was rent an office with exactly 1 desk and no conference room at all. "Mr. Patterson?" I turned. Caroline's lawyer stood in the doorway, arm extended for a handshake. His grip was firm without being aggressive, his smile warm without reaching his eyes. Professional courtesy, the kind they teach you in your first year. "Marcus Donnelly," he said, "thanks for coming in. Caroline's already in the conference room." I followed him down a hallway decorated with abstract art that probably had meaning if you knew where to look. The conference room door was open. Caroline sat on the far side of the table, and when I entered, she looked up briefly, offered a small smile, then returned her attention to her phone. No hug, no greeting. Just that smile. The kind you give to someone you're about to disappoint and want to make it clear that you've thought about it and decided it's fine. I took a seat and set my briefcase on the floor beside my chair. Marcus Donnelly settled across from me and opened a leather portfolio. "So," he said, arranging papers with deliberate care, "let me walk you through what we're proposing." "I'm listening," I said. He slid a document across the table, 4 pages stapled at the corner, text dense and single-spaced. "This is a revised ownership agreement for the Riverside property. As you know, Caroline has been managing the property exclusively for the past 3 years. She's handled all tenant relations, maintenance coordination, rent collection, and financial oversight. The current arrangement, where you retain 75% ownership despite minimal involvement, doesn't reflect the realities of who's actually operating the asset." I didn't touch the paper. "Go on." "We're proposing a restructure to 60-40, with Caroline holding the majority stake. This recognizes her contributions and gives her the control necessary to make operational decisions without requiring your approval for every minor expense." He leaned back slightly, hands folded on the table. It's a more equitable arrangement given the current state of things. The word equitable hung in the air like smoke. I let it sit there while I looked at the document between us. I could see from where I sat that it was professionally drafted, proper margins and formatting, the kind of work product that bills at $300 an hour. Marcus had put time into this, which meant Carolyn had put money into it, which meant this wasn't a casual idea she'd had last week. This had been planned. And in exchange for giving up 35% of my ownership, I said, what exactly do I receive? Marcus smiled. You'd receive a one-time payment of $200,000, which reflects the current market value of that share. Caroline has financing arranged. I nodded slowly. Did the math in my head. If the building was worth $700,000, 35% was closer to $245,000. They were offering me below market value and calling it equitable. That's generous, I said, in a tone that made clear it wasn't. It's fair market, Marcus said, his smile tightening slightly. We had the property appraised last month. At what value? He hesitated, just a fraction of a second. The appraisal came in at $580,000. I looked at Caroline. She was watching me now, phone face down on the table, waiting. $580 seems low, I said. The comparable properties on that block have been selling for significantly more. Real estate valuation is complex, Marcus said smoothly. The appraiser took into account deferred maintenance and market volatility. We're comfortable with the number. Of course they were comfortable with it. A low appraisal meant a low buyout, and once I signed, once Caroline held 60%, she could turn around and sell the whole building at true market value, pocket the difference, and I'd have no recourse because I'd voluntarily taken the lowball offer. It was a clean play. I had to give them that. If I didn't know better, if I hadn't spent 26 years reading contracts for a living, I might have believed the narrative. Daughter steps up, manages the family property, deserves a bigger share. Father, too busy with his own work to stay involved, graciously accepts a fair payment. Everyone walks away satisfied. Except I had stayed involved. I received quarterly financial reports from the property management software Caroline used, every expense and every rent payment logged and categorized. I'd seen the numbers. I knew exactly what the building generated and what it cost to run. And I knew something else, something Marcus Donnelly clearly didn't know yet. I reached down and opened my briefcase. Before we discuss this further, I said, pulling out the photocopy I'd made, I think you should see the original co-ownership agreement. I slid it across the table. Marcus picked it up, his expression still pleasant, but his eyes sharp now, scanning. I watched him read, watched his eyes move from line to line, watched the exact moment he reached page 2, paragraph 5, subclause C. His jaw tightened. This is, he started, then stopped. Read it again, then looked up at me. You drafted this? 7 years ago, I said, when Caroline's name was first added to the title. Caroline leaned forward. What does it say? Marcus set the paper down carefully, like it might explode. It says that any attempt to modify the ownership structure requires unanimous consent of all title holders. It says that any transfer of shares, any sale, any encumbrance or restructuring can only occur if every owner agrees in writing. And it says, he paused, his professional composure starting to crack, that if any owner attempts to coerce or manipulate another owner into modifying the agreement, the non-consenting owner has the right to buy out the manipulating party at a value determined by independent triple appraisal, paid for by the party attempting the modification. That's not, Caroline started. It's legally binding, Marcus said, his voice flat now. It was filed with the original title paperwork. It's part of the permanent property record. The room went very quiet. Outside, a siren passed, faint through the glass. I folded my hands on the table and waited. The silence stretched. You learn, in negotiations, that silence is a weapon. The person who speaks first usually loses. Carolyn spoke first. Dad, this is ridiculous. I've been managing that building for 3 years. You barely even think about it. I think about it every quarter when I review the financial reports, I said. I think about it every time you deposit rent checks that are 40% higher than they were when you started. I think about it quite a bit. Then you know how much work it is. You know what I've put into it. I do, I said, and I've watched you do excellent work. The building is in better shape now than when you took over management. You've been responsible and professional. Which is why I'm confused about why you'd try to force me out with a below-market buyout instead of simply asking if I'd be willing to renegotiate terms. She looked away. I didn't think you'd agree. You didn't ask. Marcus cleared his throat. Mr. Patterson, I think there may have been some miscommunication here. Caroline's intent wasn't to force anything. The proposal was simply an opening position for discussion. I looked at him. An opening position requires good faith negotiation. Lowballing the property value by 20% and presenting it as settled fact isn't good faith. It's the kind of move you make when you think the other party doesn't know any better. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I apologize if it came across that way. It did, I said, but I understand the position you're in. Caroline's your client. She came to you with a goal, and you did your job. You drafted a clean proposal that would have worked if I'd been anyone else. I picked up the document he'd slid across the table earlier. This is good work, solid structure. You clearly know what you're doing, but you should have asked who drafted the original agreement. Understanding flickered across his face. It was you. It was me. 26 years of corporate law, mergers, acquisitions, partnership dissolutions. I've seen every play and written most of them. When I put Caroline on that title, I made sure to protect both of us. Her from my creditors if I ever ran into trouble. Me from exactly this situation. Caroline's face had gone pale. So what now? You're just going to say no and keep everything the way it is? No, I said. I'm going to go home and think about what a fair arrangement actually looks like. And then I'm going to call you, not your lawyer, and we're going to talk about it like adults. If you want a larger share because you've earned it, we can discuss that. If you want to buy me out entirely, we can discuss that too. But we're going to do it honestly, with real numbers and real respect. Or we're not going to do it at all. I stood up, collected my briefcase. Marcus didn't try to stop me. Caroline stared at the table, jaw tight, hands clasped. One more thing, I said from the doorway. That clause I mentioned, the one about coercion, it requires me to prove you were trying to manipulate the situation unfairly. A bad appraisal isn't enough. But if I found out you'd been, say, deliberately underreporting income from the property or inflating maintenance costs or doing anything else to make the building look less profitable than it actually is, that would be enough. So before we talk again, you might want to make sure all your numbers are accurate. I didn't wait for a response. I walked back down the hallway, past the expensive art, past the receptionist with her professional smile, into the elevator and down to street level. The day had warmed up. The delivery truck was gone. I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes, key in my hand, not moving. The thing about watching someone betray you is that it changes every memory you have of them. All those Sunday phone calls, all those reports she'd sent so diligently, all those conversations about the property and how well it was doing, I was replaying them now with new understanding. Had she been planning this for months? Years? Or had it been a recent idea, something that occurred to her when she realized I wasn't paying close enough attention and might not catch the deception? It didn't matter. What mattered was what came next. I started the car and drove to my office, a 3-room suite in a building that was respectable without being pretentious, where the coffee was mediocre and the parking was free. I made a fresh pot anyway, sat at my desk, and pulled up the property management software on my computer. Caroline had given me administrative access when she first took over, back when she was asking questions about every tenant issue and wanted my input on lease renewals. I hadn't logged in for months, but my credentials still worked. I spent the next 3 hours going through every record from the past 3 years, every rent payment, every expense, every invoice and receipt. I made a spreadsheet because that's what you do when you need clarity. Numbers don't lie if you know how to read them. The story they told was interesting. The rents were accurate. The tenants were paying what Caroline said they were paying, and the amounts had increased steadily, just like she'd reported. But the expenses were fascinating. Maintenance costs had grown significantly. So had property management fees. There were landscaping charges that seemed high for a 4-unit building. Repair invoices from contractors I didn't recognize. Nothing egregious enough to be obvious fraud, but enough to shave profit margins down from healthy to mediocre. Enough to make the building look like more work and less reward than it actually was. I pulled out my phone and called Frank Delacroix. Frank was a property inspector I'd worked with for years, someone who knew buildings the way doctors know bodies. He answered on the second ring. "Frank, I need a favor." "Name it." "How much should it cost to maintain a 4-unit apartment building in the Riverside neighborhood? Assume good condition, no major deferred issues, regular seasonal upkeep." He thought about it. "Assuming no surprises, you're looking at maybe $12,000 to $15,000 annually. Add another $5,000 if you're paying a property manager." "And if someone was telling you it was costing $30,000? He whistled softly. "Then either they're getting robbed by their contractors or they're robbing you." That's what I thought. "Thanks, Frank." I hung up and stared at my spreadsheet. $32,000 in maintenance costs last year, $28,000 the year before. It wasn't enough to trigger alarm on its own. Older buildings need work, but this building wasn't old enough to need this. Much work. Which meant either Caroline was incompetent, which I didn't believe, or she was padding the numbers to make the building look less profitable than it was. The question was how to prove it without destroying what was left of my relationship with my daughter. I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. Through my office window, I could see the parking lot, half empty this time of day. A crow landed on the roof of a sedan and pecked at something invisible, then flew away. I was 50 years old. I'd built a career on helping people structure their business relationships so they didn't end up in situations like this one. And here I was, in exactly this situation, because I'd trusted family more than I trusted process. My ex-wife used to say I treated people like contracts. She meant it as criticism, but she wasn't entirely wrong. Contracts are clear. They say what they mean. They don't smile while planning to take your property. Maybe that's why I'd been married once and only once. Why Caroline had spent more time with her mother growing up. Why Sunday phone calls had slowly become Thursday evening checklist items. I'd built strong boundaries and clean structures, and somewhere along the way I'd forgotten that people need more than that. But people also need accountability. I picked up my phone and called Caroline. It rang 4 times before she answered. "What?" she said. Not a question, a statement of exhaustion. "Did you pad the maintenance costs?" Silence, long enough that I knew the answer. "I didn't steal anything," she finally said. "The work got done. By contractors you chose, at rates you negotiated, without competitive bids. That's not illegal. It's not, but it's dishonest, and it's exactly the kind of thing that would trigger the buyout clause if I decided to push it." More silence. "I need you to send me copies of every invoice from the last 3 years," I said. "Every contractor receipt, every purchase order, every payment record. Real copies, not summaries. I want to see the actual paperwork." "And if I don't?" "Then I hire a forensic accountant and we do this the hard way. Your choice." She hung up without answering. The invoices arrived 2 days later, not by email, but by courier. A thick envelope dropped at my office with a signature required. I spread them across my desk and started reading. It took me most of Friday afternoon and Saturday morning, but by the time I finished, I had a clear picture. Most of the work had been legitimate, real repairs by real contractors, but the prices were inflated, sometimes by 20%, sometimes by more. A roof repair that should have cost $3,000 had been billed at $4,500. Landscaping that normally ran $200 a month was coming in at $450, and every invoice came from contractors in the next county over, not local firms, not companies I could call to verify prices. Caroline had been smart about it. Nothing obvious enough to look like fraud. Just a steady pattern of overpaying for work, creating a paper trail that made the building look expensive to maintain, lowering its apparent value, setting up the justification for a buyout at below market rates. It was careful. It was patient. It was exactly what I would have done if I were trying to take over an asset without triggering alarms. And it made me angrier than the initial betrayal had. Because this wasn't impulse. This was planning. This was my daughter, who I'd taught to read contracts, who I'd mentored through law school, using everything I'd taught her to maneuver me out of my own property. On Sunday morning, I drove to Caroline's apartment. I didn't call ahead. I parked on the street, walked up the exterior stairs to her second-floor unit, and knocked. It took her a while to answer, and when she did, she was in sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked tired. "Can I come in?" I asked. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Her apartment was neat in the way that people who are constantly busy keep neat, everything in its place because there's no time for clutter. Law books on the shelf, laptop closed on the dining table, coffee mug in the sink. I sat on her couch without being invited. She stayed standing. "I read through the invoices," I said. "Okay. You've been overpaying contractors for 3 years to make the building look unprofitable." She didn't deny it, just crossed her arms and leaned against the wall. "Why?" I asked. "Because I wanted it," she said. "The property. I wanted to own it, actually own it, not just be the person who collects the rent while you keep most of the value. I'm the one who deals with the tenants. I'm the one who coordinates repairs. I'm the one who makes it work. And you just sit back and collect checks because your name is on a piece of paper. I gave you a quarter of that building as a gift. A quarter, while you kept the rest. A nice gesture, Dad, but let's be honest. It was a way to feel like you were helping me without actually giving up control." I absorbed that. There was truth in it, even if the framing was unfair. "If you wanted to buy me out," I said, "you could have just asked. Would you have agreed?" "I don't know. You didn't try." She looked away, jaw working. "I knew what you'd do. You'd have dragged it out, wanted 3 appraisals instead of 1, questioned every number, made me justify why I deserved it. You'd have turned it into a negotiation, and I'm tired of negotiating with you. I'm tired of feeling like everything has to be earned through the proper procedures, the proper documents, the proper whatever. I wanted something to just be mine without having to prove I'd followed all your rules." It was the most honest she'd been in years, maybe ever, and it hurt in a way I hadn't expected. "So you tried to take it?" I said. "I tried to pay you for it, below what you thought it was worth, sure. But I was going to pay you. That's not theft." "It's close enough." She pushed off the wall, arms still crossed. "What do you want, Dad? An apology?" "Fine, I'm sorry. I should have been honest. I should have come to you directly. I'm sorry. Does that fix anything?" "No," I said, "but it's a start." I stood up, walked to her window. She had a view of the street, residential and quiet, trees losing their leaves. A car drove past slowly, looking for parking. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to hire an independent appraiser, someone neither of us chooses, to value the building at current market rate. Then you're going to make me a real offer based on that number. If you want to buy me out completely, fine. If you want to renegotiate the ownership split, we can discuss that too. But we're going to do it with real numbers and real honesty, and you're going to pay me back the difference between what you actually spent on maintenance and what you told me you spent. That's not fair. Fair would be me triggering the buyout clause and taking the building at your expense. This is mercy." She stared at me. "You'd really do that? Take everything?" "In a heartbeat," I said, "but I'd rather not. I'd rather have a daughter who understands that trust is harder to build than wealth, and that once you break it, everything gets harder. So that's the offer. Take it or we go to court and let a judge sort it out." She was quiet for a long time. Then finally, "Okay. Okay? I'll get the appraisal. We'll do it your way." I nodded, headed for the door, stopped with my hand on the knob. "Caroline? Yeah? You're good at this. Property management, contract work, all of it. You've got the instincts and the discipline. But being good at something doesn't mean you get to cut corners when it's convenient. That's the difference between success and a reputation you can't rebuild. Remember that." I left before she could respond. The appraisal came back 3 weeks later. $720,000. Exactly what I'd expected. Caroline made an offer to buy me out completely at 75% of that value, $540,000. I countered at $550, split the difference on principle. She agreed. We signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon, not in Marcus Donnelly's glass tower, but in a title company office that smelled like old carpet and toner. She wrote me a check. I signed over my share. We shook hands like business partners, which I suppose is what we'd become. The repayment for the inflated maintenance costs came separately, $22,000 over 6 months. She never missed a payment. We don't talk much now. holidays maybe, brief texts when something matters. It's not hostile, just distant. The kind of distance that forms when you realize the person you thought you knew is actually someone else, and you're both trying to figure out if the relationship is worth rebuilding or if it's easier to just let it fade. I drive past the Riverside building sometimes. It still looks good. She's kept it up. The gutters are clean, the landscaping is neat, and there's a new sign by the entrance with a property management company logo I don't recognize. She's doing well, I think, making it work on her own. I should feel satisfied. I protected my interests. I got fair value. I taught her a lesson about consequences, all the things you're supposed to do when someone tries to take advantage. But mostly I just feel tired. The maple tree in my front yard finally got trimmed last month. The branches don't scrape my car anymore. The kitchen counter stays clean. Coffee every morning, same blue mug, same routine. I win cases, bill clients, maintain the structure of my life with the same precision I used to draft that co-ownership agreement 7 years ago. Sometimes I wonder if I should have handled it differently, if there was a way to protect myself without losing her. If the problem was what she did, or what I'd been doing all along, building walls instead of bridges, writing contracts when I should have been building trust. But wondering doesn't change anything. She has her building. I have my boundaries. And we both have the lesson that some prices are higher than they appear on paper, and some costs don't show up until years later, when you're sitting alone in a quiet house, realizing that being right isn't the same as being whole.